Do you want to know what really kills a man's youth? It's not a lack of money, nor opportunity, nor intelligence. It's the invisible addiction that consumes his late nights, distorts his self-esteem, and hijacks his ability to think clearly. We're not talking about drugs or alcohol, but something much more common, much more socially accepted, and therefore much more lethal. Addiction to women. Sounds like an exaggeration? Wait, you'll understand why this addiction is the silent kryptonite that's draining his energy, his ambition, and most importantly, his masculinity. And the worst part? No one talks about it. On the contrary, the world applauds the man who lives for the next conquest. But what this world doesn't show is the emptiness that comes after. The silent anguish between one body and another, and the emotional mediocrity that sets in when pleasure becomes the sole purpose. Philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset once said, "Love is the surrender to fascination." But what happens when you surrender not to love, but to a compulsion? When the fascination isn't with a woman, but with feeling desired, accepted, validated, then it's no longer love, it's addiction. And like all addictions, it exacts a price. And the price here is your youth, the only resource you'll never get back. Think about it. You're at the height of testosterone, energy, and ambition. Your brain is primed to conquer empires. But instead, you waste your nights in nightclubs, your days in empty Instagram messages, and your weeks waiting for a response that never comes. You invest your best time in female validation and call it enjoying life. It's like inheriting a Ferrari and using it to work as an Uber driver. You have your dream car, but you live like a regular driver, driving in circles, chasing emotional tips. But make no mistake, addiction to women doesn't look like a real addiction. It disguises itself as freedom, masculinity, even power. It makes you think you're winning when in fact you're being used. Because when your behavior is driven by the need to be accepted, you have no control. You're dependent. And dependent men don't build legacies, they build collections of regrets. While you trade your peace for constant tension, your discipline for distraction, and your time for instant pleasure, other men who understand the game, are building businesses, cultivating power, training their minds, and becoming exactly what others only pretend to be: magnetic. Because true power isn't chasing women, it's making the world chase you. Youth is fertile ground where you can plant anything, an empire or a desert. And what you decide to plant is defined by the silent choices you make every day. That text you send in the wee hours, that frivolous conversation you insist on having, that empty sex you mistake for victory. All of this seems harmless until you realize too late that you wasted the most decisive years of your life chasing something that built nothing in you. And here's the shock. You're not addicted to women. You're addicted to feeling important. Only this feeling doesn't come from within. It's rented with each new conquest and always charged with interest. And when you wake up, surrounded by empty memories and wasted time, you'll understand that the true price of your obsession with women was your freedom. This video isn't for those who want to feel comfortable. It's for those who want to awaken. It's not about judging your desires, but about understanding what they're costing you. And in the next few minutes, we'll open the 3 doors men avoid looking at: the door of illusion, the door of emotional slavery, and the door of wasted time. And if you have the courage to walk through each of them, you'll emerge on the other side not only more aware, but finally free. You think you're in control, don't you? That you're the one who chooses when to talk, when to leave, when to conquer. You think you're the predator in the game, the wolf among the sheep. But I'll show you something you may never have realized. When addiction to women takes hold, your mind ceases to be your own. The hunter becomes the hunted, but of an invisible, internal enemy that completely dominates you. Dopamine. You feel at your peak when you receive that look, that response, that match. It's a quick stimulus, a microshock of pleasure like a sip of alcohol or a hit of nicotine. And like any drug, it works. But what you don't realize is what's happening inside your brain. You're being trained, conditioned to seek short, immediate, shallow rewards. Each new conversation, each like, each validation creates a small cycle of pleasure, and this cycle closes without you realizing it. You become a rat in an invisible cage, pressing the dopamine button, hoping for emotional crumbs. Now think with me. How many times have you stayed up until the wee hours of the morning, waiting for a response that never came? How many times have you left the house, not because you wanted to, but because you needed to feel like you still had some game? How many commitments have you postponed because there was a possibility of a meeting? That's not freedom. That's programming. You're not living. You're reacting. Reacting to the desire to be noticed, to be validated, to not feel irrelevant. And that's the most dangerous game a man can play. Because while you believe you're racking up victories, you're actually selling your autonomy for cheap doses of excitement. The greatest tragedy? Society encourages it. The guy who gets multiple wins is celebrated. The one who refuses is called weird. But no one tells you the other side of the coin. The emotional exhaustion, the emptying of identity, the destruction of discipline. Because the more you chase instant pleasure, the less you tolerate real effort. Easy conquest robs you of the patience needed to build. You become intolerant of boredom, and without tolerance for boredom, no empire is built. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists, but what you accept transforms." The man who resists the tedium of construction, solitude, discipline, is condemned to seek pleasure as an escape. And that's where you lose the game. Because you no longer want to evolve, you want to escape. You no longer want to grow, you want to distract yourself. And women become the perfect stage for this. Distraction with the appearance of victory. But let's go deeper. Do you know what really excites you in this process? It's not the body. It's not sex. It's the ego. It's the feeling of, I still have value. It's the sparkle in a look that says, you are desired. This has nothing to do with her, and everything to do with you. You've become addicted to the feeling of momentary importance. That's why, even after sex, you feel empty. Because the addiction wasn't to physical pleasure, it was to the fantasy that preceded it. And once the fantasy dissolves, there's nothing left. This is the trap of illusion. You believe you're in control, but you're stuck in a cycle of self-affirmation. And the most dangerous part? This cycle gives you a false sense of progress. You think you're evolving because you feel desired. But her desire for you builds nothing. It doesn't generate money. It doesn't build character. It doesn't build vision. It only massages the ego. And an overfed ego turns into an internal tyrant that makes you fail at everything that requires consistency, patience, and long-term development. To understand the depth of this trap, let's go back in time. Alexander the Great at 20 was already commanding armies and expanding empires. And Don Juan, the mythical figure of conquest, he lived to accumulate women as trophies. Now tell me, which of them left a legacy? Alexander conquered the real world. Don Juan conquered a repetitive void. And you? Which of the two are you modeling yourself after? The problem is that today's culture glamorizes Don Juan, the conquering man who lives for the night, who changes partners like he changes shirts. But what they don't show you is that this lifestyle creates a cycle of silent anxiety. The anxiety of always having to perform, of maintaining an image, of feeling relevant, because this kind of validation isn't solid. It's fragile, it's dependent, and anything that depends on the reactions of others will never be a secure pillar of your identity. You feel it, don't you? Deep down, you know you're wasting too much energy on empty promises. That every time you enter a new game of seduction, you're more exhausted than excited. That Saturday night hunt no longer brings the same thrill. And that sometimes, all you wanted was silence and purpose, but you force yourself out because you're afraid you're no longer the one. This is addiction. It's compulsion. It's prison. Science has already proven a brain addicted to short-term dopamine hits, whether from pornography, social media, or multiple conquests, has difficulty maintaining focus, discipline, and long-term clarity. The area of the brain responsible for motivating big goals, the prefrontal cortex, weakens when subjected to excessive easy stimulation. In other words, the more you seek quick pleasure, the less capacity you'll have to build something lasting. And this explains why so many men who live for conquest end up financially broke, emotionally unstable, and spiritually empty. But there is a way out, and it begins with a brutal paradox. If you want to regain control of your life, you need to give up the illusion of control over women. You need to stop seeking and start attracting. And this isn't done with ready-made phrases or persuasion techniques. but with internal reconstruction. A man who truly values himself doesn't seek validation in the eyes of others. He imposes value with his very presence. Want to know how to reverse this cycle? Start by breaking the pattern of stimulation. Swap easy pleasure for real effort. Instead of chasing validation, build value. Instead of chasing attention, become worthy of attention. Instead of responding to every opportunity, select. Scarcity is magnetic. Discipline is irresistible. The man who has control over his impulses begins to control the environment around him, because he becomes rare. And everything that is rare is desired. After all, as Nietzsche said, happiness is the feeling that power is growing, that a resistance has been overcome. Living for pleasure is easy. Any animal can do it. But resisting immediate pleasure to build something greater, that's power. That's freedom. That's true masculinity. Ultimately, you have two options: continue collecting empty trophies and sinking into a cycle of fleeting pleasure, or become the kind of man who doesn't need to chase anything, because everything worthwhile starts chasing him. And here's the secret that almost no one realizes. True seduction begins when you stop trying to seduce. When your focus becomes your evolution, your vision, your inner power. Because a man who lives for something greater than himself becomes irresistible. Have you ever stopped to think about how many decisions in your life were made not out of conviction, but out of expectation? Out of fear of appearing uninteresting, out of fear of being ignored, out of anxiety about remaining relevant in her eyes? Perhaps you've never realized it, but your mind may be living in an elegant prison. A prison built with compliments, likes, replies, glances. And the name of this cell? Female validation. It's subtle, seductive, infiltrative. It starts innocently, a desire to impress, to appear interesting. But it soon turns into a silent dependence, a constant craving for a reaction. You're no longer trying to be yourself. You're trying to be what you think she expects. And in this game, the more you adapt, the more you lose your bearings. The man who lives in search of external validation is like a leaf in the wind. He never decides his direction, only reacts to the breeze of the moment. Popular culture feeds this prison with Machiavellian delicacy. Be desired, be irresistible, capture her gaze. But no one warns you that external desire will never fill the void that arises within. You can conquer 10 women in a week and still go to sleep feeling invisible. Because the illusion of validation is that it seems to be about the other, when in reality it's just about you, trying to escape yourself. And therein lies the cruelest blow. You think you're gaining self-esteem, but what you're gaining is just dopamine. Self-esteem doesn't come from outside. It's not built on the mirror image of others. It's the fruit of an internal cycle. You promise yourself something, you deliver, you respect yourself. Period. Everything outside of that is theater. And the stage where this theater plays out most is interactions with women. Imagine a man who only feels confident when surrounded by female gazes, who dresses to impress, who speaks to please, who acts out of fear of displeasing. Does he seem strong? Does he seem in control? Or does he seem conditioned, reactive, shaped by the applause of others? This man is the modern anti-hero. Handsome on the outside, broken on the inside. Popular online, insecure in reality. A master performer, but a slave to his own lack of center. Nietzsche said, "Become who you are." And the question that arises here is brutal. How can you become who you are if all you do is mold yourself to the desires of others? Constant validation prevents you from knowing yourself because you're too busy trying to be accepted. You don't live to discover your truth, you live to maintain acceptance. And then your identity ceases to be a creation and becomes a reaction. Have you ever noticed how some men completely lose their sense of worth when they don't receive female attention? As if the entire world were a stage where a woman's applause defines their worthiness? That's not confidence. That's neediness disguised as charm. It's emotional dependence disguised as self-esteem. It's the best disguised addiction of the male generation. Being loved not for who you are, but for how you sell yourself. And neuroscience confirms this. When the brain becomes accustomed to receiving constant micro-validation, likes, compliments, messages, it develops a hyper-reactive reward system. This means you start to feel anxious when you're not noticed. Your mood fluctuates with the attention you receive. Your sense of worth depends on the reflection you see in other people's eyes. This is neural slavery. You no longer choose what you feel what the environment allows you to. This is why so many men live in this state of emotional oscillation. Happy when they're desired, devastated when they're ignored. And this emotional roller coaster destroys their inner strength, because a man who isn't emotionally stable is manipulable. And manipulable men are disposable. By women, by the market, by life. Do you realize now what's at stake? But there's something even deeper and more dangerous. When your self-esteem depends on female validation, you don't just become emotionally unstable. You begin to develop a false identity. You begin to create a persona. More interesting, more confident, more attractive than you really are. And this persona begins to dominate your life. You feel more comfortable being what women admire than being who you truly are. And little by little, you forget who you are without their gaze. You enter what I call the chameleon cycle. You change color, tone, speech, behavior, all to adapt to the other person's desires. But the more you adapt, the more you disappear. Authenticity dissolves, emotional integrity is diluted, and worst of all, you begin to believe that you are only valuable when you are accepted. This is the breaking point where your mind ceases to be yours and becomes that of the collective. Now listen to me carefully. Women are not the problem. Validation in itself is not the problem. The problem is dependence. It's believing that you only exist when you are seen, that you only matter when you are desired, that you only have value when you are applauded. This is self-annihilation. It's the silent suicide of masculine identity. And do you know what the greatest enemy of external validation is? Integrity. A man of integrity doesn't bow for applause. He lives by principles, not applause. He doesn't mold himself to be accepted. He expands to be respected. Because he knows that being admired for who you truly are is infinitely more valuable than being desired by a person. This is where the turning point begins, and it requires a brutal change. You need to break the mirror. Stop seeing yourself through the eyes of others. Disconnect your worth from the feminine response, and rebuild your identity from within. Only then will you free yourself from emotional oscillation. Only then will you regain control over yourself. And how do you do this? Start with silence. Reduce the noise. Stop seeking constant stimulation. Spend days without exposing yourself, without bragging, without selling yourself short. Listen to yourself. Observe your impulses. Question your reactions. Meditate. Train. Work. And above all, keep your promises to yourself. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen your self-esteem. And every time you sabotage yourself, you return to the cell. This is the path to reconstruction, and it's lonely at first, but rewarding in the end. Because temporary solitude teaches you to be whole. And complete men don't beg for attention, they overflow with presence. And then, paradoxically, women return. But not as an addiction, but as a consequence. A consequence of their stability, their purpose, their clarity. Because the masculine that is whole attracts, and the masculine that is needy pursues. Maslow's pyramid teaches that at the top of human needs is self-actualization. But consider the paradox. Many men reach the top. They have beauty, they have status, they have sex, but remain empty. Because they built all of this based on an unstable identity shaped by the acceptance of others. And when the echo of applause fades, silence remains. And silence reveals what was always there. Nothing. Do you want to know if you're on this path? It's simple. Imagine yourself in a world where no one compliments you anymore, where no woman desires you, where your appearance doesn't provoke a response. Would you still respect yourself? Would you still be proud of who you are? Would you still look at yourself in the mirror with determination? If the answer is no, you're still a slave. The good news? It's reversible. But it requires courage. Courage to face the discomfort of not being noticed. Courage to reject the temptation of easy validation. Courage to build an identity that doesn't depend on likes, glances, or messages. A solid identity that holds up even when the world turns its back. Because true freedom isn't having every woman at your feet. It's not needing any of them to feel whole. You don't realize when you're losing your youth. It doesn't disappear all at once like a sudden breakup. It evaporates, silently, day after day. Nights wasted with people who mean nothing. Weekends wasted chasing sensations you no longer feel. Entire hours consumed in shallow conversations, instant exchanges, and fantasies that keep you distracted but never satisfied. Youth doesn't end in the mirror, it begins to die in your focus. The great tragedy isn't getting older, it's maturing too late. It's waking up at 30, 35, 40, with the full awareness that your most productive years were sacrificed in the name of momentary pleasure. That your best ideas never got off the ground. That your physical strength was wasted chasing stimulation. That your emotional energy was drained by women who no longer remember your name. And all of this for what? Because you confused intensity with meaning, passion with purpose, validation with value. There's a phrase few have the courage to face. You're wasting the most fertile years of your life. And by fertile, I'm not talking about biological fertility. I'm talking about your ability to build, transform, and execute. To dream big and act courageously. To fail fast and reinvent yourself quickly. To build a solid foundation, physical, mental, financial, and emotional, that will sustain everything you dream of having in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. But while you're distracted, time passes, and it passes without warning. It doesn't shout, it doesn't knock, it just keeps going. And when you realize it, it might be too late. Because unlike money, status, or achievements, time is the only resource that can't be recovered. There's no course, mentor, or technique that can give you back the 10 years you wasted chasing what you no longer value. And here's the brutal truth. You're not enjoying life. You're running away from it. Culture sold you this lie. Live intensely, enjoy it while you're young, take it all you can. And you bought it. But no one told you that this kind of enjoyment is the most effective way to waste the only phase of your life where the learning curve is fastest, where the margin for error is widest, where the energy to rebuild is strongest. You traded foundation for fireworks. The long term for the excitement of the moment. Want an example? Think of Warren Buffett. In his 20s, while many were chasing parties and adventures, he was immersed in books, investments, and discipline. Not because he was prudish, but because he saw the long term. And today, he doesn't just have billions, he has peace, influence, and the freedom to live at his own pace. This isn't about money, it's about strategy. It's about using youth as a catapult, not anesthesia. Now compare that to the TikTok generation. Young people who consume 500 stimuli per hour. Who live for appearances, for dopamine spikes, for lives in pieces. Who accumulate followers, but can't stay focused for 5 minutes. Who talk about enjoying life, but collapse at the first real challenge. Is this freedom, or is this the new prison? A cell made of distraction, anxiety, and instant gratification? The youth that is lost isn't the one that passes. It's the one that wasn't lived purposefully. The one that was exchanged for sensations, for confirmation, for a vanity that now seems ridiculous. And the most painful thing? Knowing that no one will give you that time back. Not her, not them, not society, not God. Because that time was yours, and you wasted it. But calm down. This isn't a sentence, it's a call. It's the alarm going off at the last second before collapse. Because if you're hearing this now, there's still time. There's still a way to reverse it. You can still choose another path. But you need to do now what most avoid. Look in the mirror and accept the cost of your choices. Stop blaming the world, women, the system, and admit, I chose to distract myself. Only from this truth can you build something new. And the new begins with a simple concept. Living with focus is more pleasurable than living in search of pleasure. Because focus generates progress. And progress generates fulfillment. And fulfillment generates confidence, and true confidence attracts. The woman you want, the respect you seek, the power you dream of, all of this is the consequence of a youth well lived. And youth well lived isn't about partying, it's about building. You need to become rare. And rare men today are those who have vision, clarity, direction, who say no to the ordinary, the popular, the easy, who save their best years not to impress, but to build. Because they know that today's applause is worthless compared to the legacy that will be remembered tomorrow. So stop, breathe, and ask yourself with brutal honesty, what am I building with the most valuable years of my life? If the answer is status, likes, number of achievements, maybe it's time to change the question. Because in the end, it's not about what you're doing, it's about how it's transforming you. Are you becoming freer, stronger, more whole? Or are you deluding yourself, fragmenting yourself, weakening yourself, in the name of a freedom that was never yours? Youth is the field where true masters plant their kingdoms, and also where fools bury their dreams. The choice is yours. It always has been. And if you've made it this far, you probably feel like you're on the edge. On the edge between continuing to live for pleasure or finally living for a purpose. Whether you choose to follow the dopamine cycle or break it all off and start over, no one can make that decision for you. But I can guarantee you one thing. If you choose the latter, you'll never be the same again. That's why we created the Forbidden Manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds. It's not just an audiobook. It's a mind map, a pattern breaker, applied influence engineering. Inside, you'll learn the behavioral, psychological, and emotional triggers that activate desire, not just in women, but in the world around you. It's a tool for those ready to stop chasing and start attracting. It's over 7 hours of content narrated with surgical precision, divided into practical strategies you can apply immediately. No pre-written phrases or empty formulas. Each chapter was created to teach you how to master attention, influence with intention, and become the man who sets the pace, not the one chasing. You'll discover how to generate emotional tension in 60 seconds, why the most desired men are the ones who speak the least, how to silently reverse power dynamics in any interaction, the forbidden codes of body language that trigger desire without words, and, most importantly, how to rebuild your presence magnetically without having to change who you are, just eliminating what weakens you. The Forbidden Manual is not for amateurs. It's not for those looking for shortcuts. It's for those who understand that the game isn't about conquering people. It's about conquering yourself and letting the world react to your transformation. So if you're tired of repeating patterns, if you've already understood that your time is your most valuable asset, if you're ready to master the art of silent influence and stop begging for attention,